Once again, I am at Limmeridge. I have gathered some flowers from the garden and have brought them to the churchyard. I stand here in the bewitching twilight, and I almost persuade myself that I can see that poor, unfortunate woman kissing the marble cross and beating upon it with her hands. What an extraordinary chain of events has brought me here, and how it has transformed my life. The story I tell is one of mystery, villainy, and daring. It is a story of love, a story of deceit, a true story of the woman in white.
The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. Dramatised for radio in 4 episodes by Martin Wade. With Juliet Aubrey as Marion Halcombe, Toby Stevens as Walter Hartright, Emily Bruni as Laura Fairley, Edward Petherbridge as Mr. Fairley, and Jeremy Clyde as Sir Percival. Episode 1.
The tale begins, I suppose, with my Italian friend, Professor Pesca. He had left his mother country for political reasons, the nature of which he preferred not to reveal, and had settled in England. We met by way of our work. He was a teacher of Italian. I taught drawing. One day, in 1849, at Brighton, he unwittingly set the adventure in motion.
Oh, this water is freezing.
Yes, but a cold dip is very beneficial for one, I'm told, if you can survive it. You can swim, can't you, Pesca?
Of course I can swim.
Well, the unpleasant experiences of this world are best met with courage and determination.
Oh.
So... Now, Pesca, I shall race you to the boat, the little blue one. Pesca? Pesca! Oh, my God!
My good, dear chap, you know, of course, that I can never repay you.
I don't wish you to repay me.
I will always be in your debt. And whatever I do now, you cannot properly be rewarded. Let me tell you, none the less, of a small thank you that I have arranged. I have obtained for you the prospect of 4 months' employment. More, perhaps.
Oh, yes? Where?
In Cumberland. Limmeridge House is the place. Your employer is certain Mr. Frederick Fairley. 4 guineas to instruct 2 young ladies in the art of sketching and watercolours. It will all be perfection.
I sent off my particulars to Mr. Frederick Fairley of Limmeridge House, along with a testimonial or 2. Within a week I had received a letter advising me that Mr. Fairley had accepted my services, and that I must start for Cumberland immediately. My last evening before departure I spent with my mother and my sister in Hampstead. We said our fond farewells, and then I walked back over the heath and down the high road. It was nearly 1 o'clock. The moon was full, the air close and sultry. I was immersed in my own thoughts about Limmeridge House in particular, and whether I had made the right decision, and what the 2 Cumberland ladies would look like. And...
Sir, please.
God Almighty! A hand was laid gently on my shoulder, and every drop of blood in my body seemed to freeze. I turned, and there in the middle of the broad road, there, as if it had that moment sprung out of the earth or dropped from heaven, stood the figure of a solitary woman, dressed from head to foot in white.
Sir, is that the way to London?
Her face was bent in grave inquiry. Her hand pointed in the direction of the dark cloud that hung over the city.
I asked you, sir.
Yes. Yes, it is. Forgive me, I was a little startled by your sudden appearance.
I've done nothing wrong, sir. I've met with an accident, that's all. You must not be suspicious of me.
Please, I am not, I assure you. And if you have no wish to explain why you are here at this late hour, I'll not press you on the matter. Tell me, though, if I can help you, and if I can, I will.
You are very kind. I've only been in London once before. Can I get a carriage, or is it too late? I have a friend in London. She lives in Guildford Street, and she'll be glad to receive me. Promise you won't stop me from seeing her, please.
I promise.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you know many people in London?
Yes. A great many.
Do you know many people of the rank of baronet?
No,
You're not a man of rank and title yourself.
I am not.
Good. Then I can trust you.
May I ask, is there a particular baronet?
You may not ask. I mustn't talk of it, or I'll forget myself. I've been cruelly used, sir, and cruelly wronged.
We set our faces towards London. I confess I was bewildered. Here I was in the company of a woman whose name and character, whose very presence by my side were all a mystery to me. It was like a dream.
Do you live in London?
I do. But within a matter of hours, I am leaving. I'm going to Cumberland for a while.
Cumberland. Oh, I wish I was going to Cumberland. I was there once, you know. I was happy in Cumberland.
Oh, were you born there?
No, I was born in Hampshire. I went to school in Cumberland, at a place called Limmeridge. What is wrong, sir?
I was struck by the name you mentioned, that's all. Limmeridge House, you see,
Oh,
is the
yes, the house. That is where Mrs. Fairley lived. Dear, kind Mrs. Fairley. But she's dead, and her husband too. Their little girl perhaps is married and gone away, and...
She was about to say more, I think, about the Fairley family. But a cab came our way, and at her request I hailed it. Perhaps I should come with you.
No, I'm quite all right. I'm happy now. Give me your hand, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I watched the cab disappear from view. I was perplexed, troubled. I had an uneasy sense that in helping her I might have done wrong. At the same time, however, I didn't know how I could have done right. On the opposite side of the road, I noticed a policeman strolling in the direction of Regent's Park. A carriage drove past me and pulled up alongside the policeman.
Tell me, have you seen a woman pass this way?
What sort of woman, sir?
A young woman in a white gown.
No, sir. Sorry, sir. What's the matter? What's happened?
What's happened? She's escaped from my asylum.
I arrived at Limmeridge House. During much of my journey, my mind had been fixed upon the woman in white. I had wondered if she had been found and returned to the asylum. I had wondered what would become of her if she was still free. Now, however, this conjecturing was put aside, for I was about to meet one of the two young ladies of the house. She was at the other end of the drawing room. Her back was facing me. I was struck by the rare beauty of her form and the unaffected grace of her attitude. Forgive me.
Mr. Hartright?
She turned round. Her complexion seemed almost swarthy. The dark down on her lips was almost a moustache. Her mouth and jaw were large, firm, masculine. The lady was ugly.
Mr. Hartright, my sister and my uncle are in their respective rooms. The one with a headache, the other with his treasures and artifacts. So for the time being, you must make do with me. My name, sir, is Marian Halcombe.
Halcombe?
Yes. My late mother, you see, married twice. I am the result of the first marriage, and Miss Fairley is the result of the second. So she and I, in truth, are half-sisters only. Which helps to explain why we are as unlike each other as we possibly could be. She has beauty. I have none.
Oh,
Please, Mr. Hartright, to pretend otherwise would be absurd. To continue, she is an angel, while I am crabbed and odd. She has a fortune, but my father was poor and left me nothing. Despite these differences, however, we cannot live without each other, Laura and I. We are orphans together. You must please both of us, Mr. Hartright, or else please neither.
And what of Mr. Fairley?
My uncle you will please best by troubling him as little as possible. He never joins us at our meals. Keeps bachelor state in his own apartment. Oh, of course, he is not truly my uncle. He is Laura's uncle and her guardian. There. You know it all now, I think.
I'm grateful. But in reference to your family, Miss Halcombe, and to your mother in particular...
Yes?
I cannot help but mention an incident which occurred last night, and which has been worrying me. A curious incident and a remarkable coincidence. And I proceeded to tell Miss Halcombe the full narrative of my meeting with a woman in white, of how she had talked of Mrs. Fairley in the most affectionate terms, and had referred to the little girl, Miss Laura Fairley, I assumed, as if perhaps they had been at school together.
Well, Mr. Hartright, it is all very extraordinary, and I can understand why you have been anxious about the matter. Now, I think you did right, by the way, to protect the young woman's freedom.
You do?
Nothing you have recounted suggests to me that she was insane. Frightened, certainly. In a state of shock, perhaps. But not insane.
I am glad to hear you say so, Miss Halcombe. The notion that I had let a mad woman loose upon London has caused me much self-reproach.
You acted properly, I'm sure. Though I wish that you had found out her name. We must clear up this mystery. We really must. The village school which my mother established when she came here, that still functions, but there are no teachers there from that time. The only other recourse is my mother's correspondence. We have a large collection of her letters. I'll look through them and see if there's anything that might help us.
Thank you.
By the way, I would urge you not to speak of this matter to my sister, or indeed to Mr. Fairley. Laura is rather nervous and sensitive, and I wouldn't wish to alarm her.
And Mr. Fairley?
Yes, well, he is nervous and sensitive too in his own distinctive fashion. And I don't think you will wish to alarm him.
Mr. Fairley, sir.
Come in, but do it quietly, if you will.
Thank you, sir.
Pray, sit down, Mr. Hartright. But don't move the chair as you do so. The slightest noise, you know, cuts through me like a knife. Well, Mr. Hartright, so glad to be able to possess you at Limmeridge House.
Mr. Fairley, believe me, the pleasure is all...
Please speak more softly, if you will.
The pleasure is all mine.
The pecuniary arrangements, are they satisfactory?
Most satisfactory.
So glad. And your room, will it suffice?
Mr. Fairley, it is the most luxurious room I have ever seen.
Good. Let me assure you, Mr. Hartright, there is no want of taste and sensitivity at Limmeridge House. Your status as an artist will be properly regarded, I can assure you of that. Put this tray of coins back in the cabinet, will you? Exertion of any kind, you know, is indescribable torture to me.
So, Mr. Hartright, how is Mr. Fairley?
In a fragile state, I think. How is our mystery?
Still plunged in midnight darkness, I'm afraid. But I've only looked through a portion of my mother's letters yet, so don't despair. My sister has left her room, Mr. Hartright, and is, I believe, in the summer house. Let me introduce you. This way.
We walked through the garden down a winding path and approached a pretty summer house built in the form of a small Swiss chalet. Its single room was occupied by a young lady who was turning over the leaves of a little sketchbook. She was fair and delicate, with truthful, innocent blue eyes and a sweet expression. I was beguiled from the very first.
Look, Mr. Hartright, your model pupil. No sooner has she heard that the drawing master has arrived than she seizes her sketchbook and is ready to begin.
Mr. Hartright.
Miss Fairley.
Delighted to meet you. The truth is, I was glancing over my juvenile efforts and becoming increasingly fearful that there is no hope for me.
Laura, dear, you must let the drawing master be the judge of that.
Well, if I do, you must show him your sketchbooks too.
I will. And when he laughs, I'll share the joke.
I trust that I will find an encouraging word to say about you both.
Mr. Hartright, I promise you, I wish for no compliments. I want the truth.
Yes, and she meant what she said. I was certain. But there was something about Miss Fairley which troubled me. Something that was lacking, something incomplete. Or was it something lacking in myself which prevented me from seeing her as I should? I was to find out. soon.
Mr. Hartright, I have something of interest to tell you.
It was the evening. Miss Halcombe and I were in the drawing-room. Through the French window I could see Miss Fairley walking slowly up and down the terrace, gazing at the moon's mysterious rays of light which slanted across the garden.
There is a letter here, written by my mother to Laura's father when he was away on business. It mentions a Mrs. Catherick, who had arrived in the village to nurse her sister. Now, this Mrs. Catherick had brought her only child with her. A sweet little girl, writes my mother, about a year older than our darling Laura. And my mother agreed to let the girl attend the school that she ran, and to do so for as long as Mrs. Catherick was in Limmeridge.
I caught sight of Miss Fairley again as she walked by in the moonlight. She wore a dress of white muslin. Beautiful she looked in it, naturally, though it was very plain and unpretentious.
Now, Mr. Hartright, let me read you the rest of the letter. I have taken a strong interest in my new scholar, writes Mrs. Fairley. She is 11 years of age, a sweet, affectionate, grateful girl, but her intellect is not as developed as it ought to be, and she says the quaintest things. Yesterday, for instance, because her clothes leave something to be desired, I gave her one of Laura's old frocks to wear. White, I told her, suits girls of your complexion.
Once more Miss Fairley glided into view, but this time she stopped.
Oh, thank you, Mrs. Fairley, she said, after she had kissed my hand. Thank you. I will always wear white for as long as I live. It will help me to remember you when I have left here. Well, the coincidence is interesting, is it not?
Miss Fairley leant on the balustrade of the terrace, my gaze fixed on the white gleam of her gown.
And notice, Mrs. Fairley reports that the girl's intellect was not as developed as it should have been. Well, perhaps it has never developed. Perhaps even as a young woman she can't grow out of that grateful childish promise of hers.
Yes, you may be right.
But listen to the last few lines of the letter, Mr. Hartright, and prepare yourself for a surprise. Dearest husband, there is a special reason why I am so fond of little Anne Catherick. She is not as pretty as our own sweet Laura, you will say that no girl could be, but in her hair, her eyes, the shape of her face, in all respects, young Anne Catherick is...
Yes, of course!
Laura's living likeness.
But even before Miss Halcombe had said these words, I had leapt to my feet. The same thrill ran through me as when, that night, on that lonely high road, a hand was laid upon my shoulder.
You see it. You see the resemblance, just as my mother did.
Yes, I saw it. There stood Miss Fairley alone in the moonlight, and in her stance, the turn of her head, her appearance, she was, in truth, the very image of the woman in white. Now, of course, that sense of incompleteness I had felt when I first saw Miss Fairley, that was gone. The puzzle was solved. I had failed to recognize the resemblance between her and Anne Catherick, but now I saw it, all too clearly. At Miss Halcombe's request, I kept the discovery of the likeness a secret from her sister, lest she should find it perturbing. But I was soon to discover something else with regard to Miss Laura Fairley.
Well, ladies, what do you think?
It is a wonderful view. Wonderful.
Well, let us draw it then. If we are to misrepresent nature, as I always do, let us manage it on a grand scale.
An appreciation of the beauties of nature, it does not come to us by intuition. We must acquire it and practice it, and to do so we must struggle against countless diversions and competing attractions. Yes, and even as I spoke these words, my eye was upon Miss Fairley, not upon the leaping waves and sandhills and moorland. My feelings were all for her, not for the distant scene. I was in love.
Where is Marion?
She went to her room to fetch something. Not her sketchbook, I think.
No, indeed.
Do you realize, Miss Fairley, I have been here almost 2 months?
Is it so little?
Well, now, I trust you didn't mean by that remark that time has seemed intolerably slow since I came to Limmeridge House.
No, I did not. Not at all. I meant that you have become so much part of our lives at Limmeridge that it might be thought you'd been here for years. Are you happy here, Mr. Hartright?
Yes, indeed. Much more so than I deserve to be. Life here is almost perfect.
Wait for the winter.
Believe me, I would do, if I were given the chance. I would wait for the summer after, too. I would never leave. Play some more, please. It didn't occur to me that my words had betrayed me, or had startled Miss Fairley into a sudden knowledge of the truth. But when we met again in the morning, a profound change had come over her. Those sweet lips no longer smiled at me. Her features had lost their animation. There was a coldness in her. Her nature, too truthful to deceive others, was too noble to deceive itself. It declared, "He loves me, and I am sorry for him." Good morning, Miss Fairley. Good morning, Miss Halcombe.
Good morning.
It is cooler today.
Yes,
The end of the summer, I fear.
yes. The end of the summer.
It is so cool, in fact, that I think I'll go indoors.
Before you do, Laura, I have talked with your uncle. He thinks that the purple room is the best, and it is being got ready. Oh, and he confirms that Monday is the day, not Tuesday.
Monday. Very well. You'll excuse me.
You're expecting a visitor?
Yes. And his arrival, as it happens, is not unconnected with something that I have to tell you. Mr. Hartwright, I am not one, as you know, who likes to flatter. When I say, therefore, that in the time you have been here I have come to form a strong regard for you, you will know that I speak the truth.
I'm very grateful.
I would also like to think, Mr. Hartwright, that you and I are friends.
I would like to think so, too.
As your friend, therefore, I must inform you, in my own plain, blunt language, I have discovered your secret.
My secret?
You need not make a confession, though you are, I know, too honest to attempt a denial. Nor are you to be blamed. Pitied, rather. By forming an attachment to my sister, you are guilty of weakness and of lack of attention to your own best interests, but nothing worse.
Miss Halcombe,
let me continue. As I say, you are not at fault. Nevertheless, the situation is this. You must leave Limmeridge House.
Leave?
Yes, you must.
When?
As soon as possible, before more harm is done. Mr. Hartwright, this has nothing, I am glad to assure you, to do with the painful question of rank and standing. Nothing at all. I would ask you to leave where you are representative of the oldest and wealthiest family in England.
Then may I know why?
Laura Fairley is engaged to be married.
Married? I see.
Mr. Hartwright, you must leave for her sake as well as your own. Your presence has unsteadied her and made her unhappy. You see, it cannot be said that her engagement has a strong hold upon her affections.
Can it not?
It is an engagement of honour, not love. One which was sanctioned by her father on his deathbed. She was content to make her promise to the gentleman in question. She was settled in her mind and in her heart. But your arrival has threatened to disturb all that. Be kind to her, therefore, just as you were to that poor woman in white. Be considerate to her, and leave Limmeridge House.
Yes. Well, I must. I will.
Thank you. As you have heard, we expect a visitor on Monday.
I understand. The gentleman in question. I will go as soon as I can. Today, perhaps.
No, not today. Saturday, I think. Give yourself time to find a reason for your going and to explain it to Mr. Fairley.
As you wish.
Mr. Hartwright, believe me, there is no hope for your love. Crush it, therefore. Don't shrink under it like a woman might. Crush it. Tear it out. Trample it underfoot.
Am I permitted to inquire who it is that is engaged to Miss Fairley?
He is a man of property. From Hampshire.
Hampshire? And his name?
Sir Percival Glyde.
A knight or a baronet?
A baronet, of course.
Do you know many people in London?
Yes, a great many.
Do you know many who are of the rank of baronet?
No. May I ask, is there a particular baronet?
You may not ask. I mustn't talk of it or I'll forget myself. I've been cruelly used, sir, and cruelly wronged.
I went indoors, back to my room. Thoughts and feelings crowded in on me. Sorrow, pain, bitterness and envy at the news of Miss Fairley's engagement. Fear and foreboding, too. The various circumstances. The woman in white's fondness for Miss Fairley's mother. Her remarks about a certain baronet. The fact that Sir Percival had property in Hampshire, where the woman in white had said that she was born. None of these perhaps exceeded the realm of coincidence. But the sense of eeriness and danger remained. The feeling that I was linked to a chain of events which even my departure from Limmeridge House would be powerless to break. Come in.
Mr. Hartright. I had hoped that all painful subjects of conversation were exhausted for today, but it is not to be. There is, I fear, some villainy at work, an attempt to frighten Laura.
To frighten her?
An attempt, indeed, that has succeeded. Here. An anonymous letter addressed, as you see, to my sister.
Last night I dreamt of you, Miss Fairley. I was in church and you were about to be married. So pretty and innocent you looked that tears came to my eyes. And I dreamt that at your side was a man aged 45, and upon his hand was a red scar, and the tears that I shed became 2 rays of light. And with the rays I saw into the man's heart, and it was as black as night. And upon it the fallen angel had written in red flaming letters, "Without pity and without remorse he will strew his wife's path with misery." Who could have written this?
Whoever it was is not illiterate by any means.
No, but the sort of mind that could produce such a thing
is incoherent at the very least. You have not quite finished the letter, I think.
Miss Fairley, I believe in dreams, and so should you. Inquire, I beg you, into the past life of that man with the scar on his hand. I urge you to do this because I have a great interest in your well-being. You are the daughter of a woman who was my first, my best, my only friend.
I have been asking myself what should be done. I might seek legal advice, of course. I could do so tomorrow, indeed, when Mr. Gilmore arrives.
Mr. Gilmore?
He is the family solicitor, an old and trusted friend.
His visit, I take it, is
in connection with the marriage, yes.
Ah.
I ought to tell you that during his stay here, Sir Percival intends to fix the date of the wedding. He has told Mr. Fairley that he is anxious that it should take place before the end of the year.
Does your sister know about this?
Oh, she does not know.
Was it posted here?
No, a lad from the village brought it. I saw him myself. He said he was asked to do so by an elderly woman whom he'd never seen before. Perhaps we should take a walk into the village and see what we can discover.
The letter didn't mention Sir Percival Glyde by name.
No, it did not.
But there were 1 or 2 particulars about the man in the dream.
Yes, and they apply with accuracy to Sir Percival. The scar, which came from a wound that he received in Italy.
His age?
Yes, Sir Percival is 45, I believe.
45. And Miss Fairley is so young.
True, but that doesn't mean they cannot both be happy.
Our inquiries at Limmeridge made no progress, and our walk through the village took us at length to the school. It was by now late afternoon, but we found a classroom still occupied by Mr. Dempster, the schoolmaster, and a sturdy, white-headed boy whose name, it emerged, was Jacob.
I've been obliged to detain young Jacob, Miss Halcombe, because he's been frightening his fellow pupils.
Frightening them? How?
He's been telling them that he's seen a ghost.
Well, I did see a ghost.
You see? He persists in spite of all that I say to him.
When did you see it?
Yesterday evening, miss.
Miss Halcombe, please.
It was all in white, as a ghost should be.
All in white?
Yes, sir, from head to foot, sir.
Where was it?
In the churchyard.
Of course it was. You've rehearsed your story well, Jacob, and you've taken the trouble to make it follow the traditional lines. I suppose you can also tell me whose ghost it was?
Yes, miss, I can.
Miss Halcombe, I know this boy. He's a very wayward boy.
Whose ghost was it, Jacob?
It was the ghost of Mistress Fairley.
What? What did you say?
Mistress Fairley, she that founded this school.
You must forgive him, Miss Holcombe. He thinks he saw a white figure standing by the marble cross, and of course he and everyone in Limerick knows that the cross is over Mrs. Fairley's grave. Therefore...
Yes, I understand. Listen, Master Jacob. Whatever it was you saw in the churchyard, or claim to have seen, you did not see a ghost, so let us hear no more about it.
Miss Holcombe.
Yes?
I must tell you, in my opinion, it was Anne Catherick that the boy saw.
Anne Catherick?
It may seem preposterous, I know, but he talked about a figure in white.
Well, yes, as a ghost should be. It's possible, Mr. Hartwright, that he invented the whole tale.
But we know how dearly Anne Catherick loved your mother. If for some reason she had come to the village...
Mr. Hartwright...
If she were here, would it not be natural for her to visit Mrs. Fairley's grave?
It might well be, yes, but who is to say that she is in the village?
The likelihood appears stronger, Miss Holcombe, if one considers the letter that was written to Miss Fairley.
The letter?
I said nothing to you at the time. I had this notion, but decided that my imagination must be getting the better of me.
You believe Anne Catherick wrote that letter?
Yes, I do now. These two events, the sending of the letter and the sighting of a figure in white, they surely bear each other out. Anne Catherick is in the village. I'm almost certain of it. Miss Holcombe, show me the churchyard if you would, so that I can see your mother's grave. She took me to the churchyard, and then went straight back to the house. I found the grave and looked around it. I looked at the marble cross. On the side which bore the inscription, the cross was clouded here and there by weather stains. But on the other side, I noticed that it was completely unmarked.
Have you brought any news?
Yes, Miss Holcombe, I have. Someone has indeed been visiting your mother's grave. Someone has been cleaning the cross. The work is quite recent, that's clear enough. And it is not yet finished.
I see.
I intend to go back to the churchyard. It was in the evening when young Jacob saw the figure there. Perhaps this evening the figure will return. I stood in the porch of the church and looked out. Before me a patch of bare burial ground. In the distance a strip of lonely brown hill and sunset clouds. A dreary scene and a dreary hour. I waited. A little more than half an hour elapsed. Then someone entered the churchyard. A woman dressed in a dark cloak. She walked to Mrs. Fairley's grave and stood there for a while, gazing at it. Then she went to the little stream that runs by the churchyard wall and dipped a linen cloth in it. She returned to the grave, kissed the cross, knelt down and began to clean the inscription. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice me until I was quite close by. It's all right. Don't be frightened.
Who are you?
I'm a friend.
A friend?
We met some months ago, late at night. Do you remember? You asked me the way to London.
Oh, yes. I remember. You were very kind to me. How is it you are here?
Well, when we last met, I told you that I was going to Cumberland. I have been staying at Limerick House.
Limerick House, of course. Oh, how happy you must be.
Yes, in truth, I have been very happy. I looked at her, saw Laura Fairley's face in Anne Catherick's. Of course, the face before me was worn and weary. It had none of the tender, delicate bloom which touched Miss Fairley's face. But it seemed to me that a single sad change to Miss Fairley's life, one act of misfortune, was all that was lacking to make the likeness complete. You know, I'm glad we have met again. I have felt anxious about you.
Anxious? Why?
Well, after you left me that night, a strange thing happened. A carriage came past, and one of the occupants spoke to a policeman and asked if he'd seen you. He said you'd escaped from his asylum. But the policeman hadn't seen you. And I said nothing. I could have told them. I could have said where you were going, but I kept silent. I helped you escape.
Well, then, I am very grateful to you.
You mentioned that night that you had a friend to go to.
Mrs. Clements, yes, I found her. She is very kind to me. But she's not so much of a friend as Mrs. Fairley was. Dear Mrs. Fairley, my heart aches at the sight of a stain upon her tomb. It ought to be kept as white as snow.
Tell me, have you known Mrs. Clements for long?
She was a neighbour of ours in Hampshire. She took care of me when I was a young girl.
Had you no father or mother to look after you?
I never saw my father. He's dead, I suppose. My mother. I don't get on with her. We're a trouble and a fear to each other.
I'm sorry to hear it.
Mrs. Clements, though, she's good to me. She doesn't think I should be back in the asylum.
Well, indeed, nor do I.
There's only one thing I don't like about Mrs. Clements. She teases me because I dress all in white. She made me wear this ugly, dark cloak this evening. Do you know Miss Fairley? Does she wear white still as she used to when she was a girl? Is she well and happy?
She wasn't very well or happy this morning.
Oh.
Would you like me to tell you why? She received your letter.
How do you know it was mine? How do you know? I didn't write that letter.
Yes, you did. And it was wrong of you. It was wrong to frighten Miss Fairley. If you have anything to tell her that is important, you should do it in the proper fashion. If, for instance, there's a good reason why she shouldn't marry Sir Percival Glyde, then
no,
you must...
please, don't say his name. Don't say his name.
Come, this won't do. Calm yourself, I beg you.
If only I would die, Mrs. Fairley, and be at rest with you. Oh, Mrs. Fairley, you know how I love your daughter. If I could save her, I would. Tell me how to save her. Tell me, please.
Before too long, an older woman hurried into view, alarmed by the sound of Anne's distress, and angry with me for frightening a poor, helpless creature. But I managed to appease her, and to discover that she was Anne Catherick's good, kind friend, Mrs. Clements. Soon the two of them left the churchyard. I watched as they went up the path that led to the moor. Watched till all trace of Anne Catherick had faded in the twilight. And I was anxious for her, and sorrowful. As sorrowful indeed, as if it were the last time I would ever see her.
You are quite sure?
I am, Miss Halcombe. The words she spoke, the look of hatred and fear on her face when I mentioned his name. It was Sir Percival Glyde. I know it, who put her in the asylum. But why he did so, I just can't say.
Well, we must discover the reason. And when we do, Sir Percival will have to satisfy any doubts there may be as to his conduct. If he fails to do so, he will not marry my sister, I assure you of that.
How much more Anne Catherick is willing or able to reveal is uncertain. But it may be that she'd speak more readily to another woman than she spoke to me.
She's staying at Todd's Corner, you say?
Yes. Perhaps if Miss Fairley...
No, I think not. This business of the letter has upset her enough. I shall go.
The following morning, shortly after Miss Halcombe left the house to find Anne Catherick, I headed for Mr. Fairley's study. A few months ago, Mr. Fairley had declared himself delighted to possess me at Limmeridge House, but I had not set eyes upon him since. Now it was my task to tell him that I was obliged to leave. Something unforeseen has occurred which necessitates my return to London.
A matter of life and death, is it?
No, Mr. Fairley.
Then I do not see that your request has any justification. Indeed, it is highly irregular. I am more disappointed and shocked than I can possibly say.
I am very sorry.
Not as sorry as I am, Mr. Hartright. I have a right to refuse your application, you know.
I suppose you have, but I must advise you, Mr. Fairley, that even if you do refuse me, I still intend...
Yes, stop, no. I forbid you to speak to me in that offensive, threatening manner. I forbid you to argue with me. My nerves won't stand it.
So?
Your request is granted.
Thank you, Mr. Fairley. I plan to leave tomorrow.
Today, tomorrow, it doesn't matter. But when you do leave, make sure you manage it without a lot of noise.
You are back very soon?
Yes. Anne Catherick has gone.
Gone?
She left the farm along with Mrs. Clements at 8 this morning. I spoke with the farmer's daughter there. She said that she was with Anne yesterday evening, a little after you had seen her, and that as they talked, Anne had started showing signs of distress and had fainted.
Why?
Well, the girl couldn't understand it, but it seems that she had been telling Anne about events at Limmeridge House, and one of the items of news inevitably was Sir Percival Glyde's expected arrival.
My hours were numbered at Limmeridge House. I went out for a walk, took the path that led to the spot above the beach, a favourite of mine and Miss Fairley's. Now the view which he had sketched was cold and barren. The tufts of ferns and grasses were overcome by pools of stagnant water and draggled weeds. The flowers whose names she had taught me and whose forms I had taught her to draw, they were gone. Leaves fell around me. The sky was grey. Winter was approaching, but it already gripped my heart.
My name, sir, is Gilmore.
Ah, yes, the family solicitor. Pleased to meet you.
Miss Halcombe has already told me about the anonymous letter and has indicated that you have an interest in the affair.
Yes.
I would like to inform you, therefore, that I have decided to send a copy of the letter to Sir Percival Glyde's solicitor.
Have you indeed? I'm glad of that. Thank you.
It's an unpleasant, unsavoury business, but Sir Percival's standing is very high, you know, and I'm certain that nothing has occurred which could sully his reputation. Now, I feel quite easy about it all.
Oh, do you?
In my experience of our sad state of society, things like this happen all too often. Unfortunate women, malicious letters.
I'm afraid, Mr. Gilmore, that I see the matter differently.
Just so, just so. I am old and I take the professional view. You are young. Your view, therefore, is romantically inclined. Just so. Well, events will decide. Charming places, though it's not what it was.
Saturday morning. My bags were being brought down from my room, and it was time for leave-taking.
So, Mr. Hartright.
Miss Halcombe. Miss Fairley?
I'm very sorry that you are going.
Thank you, Miss Fairley. I shall remember those kind words. I, too, am sorry.
Goodbye, Mr. Hartright.
Miss Fairley...
Goodbye.
It is better this way, for you and for her.
Yes.
I shall write to you.
Will you, Miss Halcombe? I'd be so grateful.
It is the very least that you deserve. Whatever happens, but whatever we discover with regard to Anne Catherick and Sir Percival, you shall know it.
And if I, for my part, can be of any help, once my folly is forgotten...
Of course. I will trust you. As my friend and as Laura's friend. As my brother and as hers. God bless you.
She kissed my forehead and left the room. I went to the window, saw the carriage draw up on the gravel, and 2 of the servants begin to put my bags on board. And as I watched them, I heard behind me the rustle of a dress. I turned. Miss Fairley, seeing that I was alone, hesitated at the door, but then stepped forward.
I have brought you something, a gift of dubious value, I'm afraid. A sketch of the summer house.
Yes, indeed. The place where we first met. Miss Fairley, I shall treasure this for as long as I live. I shall prize it above all other possessions.
Well, it will remind you, perhaps, of happy days we spent together.
Yes. Days which may never return. But you will, I hope, remember me from time to time.
I will. I promise it.
Give me your hand.
You must leave me now. Please. Leave me.
These words were witness to her love for me. These words marked the start of my banishment. I let go of her hand. I said no more. One farewell look I gave as she sank into a chair, and then I was gone. The image of Laura Fairley was already a memory of an unrecoverable past.
The day after Mr. Hartright left Limmeridge House... Mr. Fairley? Gilmore here. The day after, as I say, Mr. Fairley at last consented to talk with me about the proposed marriage between his niece and Sir Percival Glyde. Mr. Fairley.
Enter. Gilmore, come in very quietly, if you will. I've explained too many times, Gilmore. I find it upsetting to talk about business.
Yes, perhaps you do, but...
There's no reason at all why you should want to disturb my tranquillity, unless it is out of malice.
Oh, Mr. Fairley.
The marriage is a good thing, I'm certain. Laura's father sanctioned it, you know, on his deathbed.
Yes.
And I sanctioned it too. It is a desirable match, and I see no reason why the wedding should not proceed as quickly as possible. Indeed, I shall be glad when it is all over.
But as regards the settlement...
As regards the settlement, you look into it. Why don't you, Gilmore? That's the kind of thing you do, surely. Talk to Laura if you need to. Talk to Sir Percival if you absolutely must. He arrives tomorrow, I believe. Get everything ready, dear Gilmore, and then, when it is, I'm sure I shall say yes.
Sir Percival, may I introduce Mr. Gilmore to you?
Mr. Gilmore, this is a great pleasure. You are, I gather, a devoted friend of the family.
Well, I have tried to be of service to the Fairleys, and they, in return, have been indulgent towards my faults.
Sir Percival, I am afraid that my sister will not be joining us. Not for a while, at least. She is feeling a little unwell.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear it. I'm very sorry indeed. But as she's not with us, perhaps this would be an appropriate moment to address an unpleasant and distasteful matter, one which is too painful for me to talk of directly with Miss Fairley.
You are referring, no doubt, to the anonymous letter that she received.
Yes, I have read the copy which you were good enough to send.
We believe that the letter was written by a young woman named Anne Catherick.
You're right, Miss Halcombe. I'm sure of it. Let me tell you what I know. Anne Catherick and her mother live in Hampshire. Anne is an only child and has been mentally disturbed from an early age. Mrs. Catherick was long ago deserted by her husband, and though mother and daughter live some distance from my own home, I have kept in touch with Mrs. Catherick in consideration of faithful service rendered in past years. So when her daughter's mental condition deteriorated, and Mrs. Catherick recognised that Anne must be placed under proper medical care, I offered to pay for Anne to be looked after in a private asylum.
Ah, I see.
Unluckily for me, Anne discovered something of my involvement.
And she assumed?
She assumed that I was chiefly, if not solely, responsible for her being locked away. I became the object of her deep suspicion and hatred, as the letter demonstrates. I still am.
Sir Percival, you've made everything clear, and I'm most grateful to you for doing so, as I'm sure is Miss Halcombe.
Yes, indeed.
I'm happy, of course, to provide any further details you may require, the names of the doctors who admitted her to the asylum and so on. I should add that my solicitor has been instructed to spare no expense in finding the poor young woman and restoring her to medical care. Have you any questions, Mr. Gilmore?
No, I'm entirely satisfied.
Miss Halcombe?
I have no questions now.
But you are, I think, not as satisfied as Mr. Gilmore. You would rather not take my word on the matter.
Sir Percival, please understand, I do not distrust you.
But as one more closely involved in the affair than Mr. Gilmore here, you are entitled to some proof of what I've told you.
I do not ask for such proof.
You do not, but you will excuse my obstinacy if I insist that it be provided. I therefore ask you, Miss Halcombe, to be so good as to write to Mrs. Catherick and to ask her for verification.
Sir Percival, I have no wish to write such a letter.
Nevertheless, I beg you to do it. As a favour to me.
In consequence of this conversation, in which, by the way, I thought Sir Percival conducted himself with quiet tact and refinement, Miss Halcombe sent word to Mrs. Catherick, and Wednesday's post brought a reply.
It is, as you see, Mr. Gilmore, a brief, terse letter.
Yes, but it is as plain a confirmation of Sir Percival's statement as could be desired, I think. Has Sir Percival seen it?
Yes, he has. I suppose now that we have done all that we can.
If we are friends of Sir Percival, and we know him and trust him, then we have done all and more.
Yes, indeed.
And yet, Miss Halcombe, you are doubtful.
I ought not to be, I know. I have been over-anxious about Laura, I suppose, and it has unsettled me. Oh, but I do wish that Mr. Hartright was still with us, and I could hear what he thought.
You would sooner trust Mr. Hartright's judgment than your own?
Well...
Or mine?
No. Forgive me. Mr. Gilmore, there is another reason for my disquiet. This morning, after I had shown Sir Percival Mrs. Catherick's reply, he began to talk about Laura. About how he had observed that her spirits were low, and that her manner towards him had changed since his previous visit here. And he said...
Yes?
He said that with regard to the proposed marriage, he would urge Laura to reflect very seriously on two things. First, his own conduct, from the beginning of the courtship to the present time, and secondly, the circumstances under which the engagement was made.
You mean the fact that her father sanctioned the marriage?
Exactly. And he declared that if, after considering these matters, Laura then decided to withdraw from the engagement, she would be perfectly free to do so.
No man could have said more than that, Miss Halcombe. Few, indeed, would have said as much.
Well, perhaps.
He has specifically requested that Miss Fairley should not act against her own desires.
Yes, but do you not see? That is the very outcome I am likely to encourage if I pass his message on to her. Sir Percival's conduct has been beyond reproach. Not only that, but Laura's father, on his deathbed, spoke hopefully of her marriage to Sir Percival. So Laura's love for honour and truth, and her respect for her father's memory, together make it impossible that she should break the engagement.
Miss Halcombe, what do you say? That Sir Percival made his statement in the full knowledge that he would be obliging Miss Fairley to accept him?
No, no. If I thought he was capable of such baseness as that, I would tell him to leave Limmeridge House at once. But unconsciously, perhaps, without intending it.
Forgive me, Miss Halcombe, but such speculation, it seems to me, is not to the point. Whatever effect Sir Percival's words might have, they won't prejudice the outcome, for the simple reason that the outcome is already decided. Nothing has changed. Sir Percival is the same man that he was when last he was here. Why should Miss Fairley even contemplate rejecting him?
Mr. Gilmore, do come in.
I wondered, my dear Miss Fairley, if you and I might have a talk.
Of course, take a seat.
Oh, thank you. My dear, I have to get back to London today.
I'm sorry to hear it.
But before I go, I would like us to talk about the engagement and matters related.
Must we, Mr. Gilmore?
Yes, my dear, I think we must. Your sister advises me that she has spoken to you today about the marriage.
Yes.
I believe she has told you, among other things, that it had been Sir Percival's purpose in coming to Limmeridge to fix a day for the wedding. But you, it seems, would prefer that it be decided sometime in the future.
Yes, that is right.
I have to confess I was a little surprised to hear it. You are quite determined about this?
Yes, I am. I have asked if I might defer my final answer for a month or two, till the end of the year at the latest. Has Sir Percival...
Your sister informed him only a few minutes ago.
And?
He granted the request straight away, without demur. So, we cannot at present be certain if you are to marry or not. The decision rests with you. But even when the time comes, I must be ready to draw up a settlement. And to do that, I need to consult you first.
If it does happen, if I am...
If you are married...
Please don't let him part me from Marion. Please, Mr. Gilmore.
Well, that, my dear, you can easily settle by private arrangement. I was referring to your property, to the disposal of your money. If you were to make a will when you come of age, to whom would the money go?
Might I leave it to Marion?
Certainly, but you should bear in mind what a large sum it is. Do you wish everything to go to her?
No, not quite everything. There is someone else who might like a little keepsake. If I were to die, I'm sure there'd be no harm in him having it. Mr. Gilmore, I'm so sorry. Forgive me.
Oh, my dear, please, there's nothing to forgive. You have not been well.
I wish you were not leaving us. I wish things were as they used to be. Mr. Gilmore, I wish I could be happy again.
I am returning to London. Returning indeed, heavy-hearted. Poor Miss Fairley. So young, and yet already looking back on more cheerful days, and all too clearly anxious and distressed about what is to come. I confess, before I talked with her, I was rather inclined to be on Sir Percival's side, believing he would have had good reason to complain about the wedding arrangements being put off. But by the time I had left her, my sympathies were all with Miss Fairley. Sir Percival is courteous and considerate, delightfully free from pride. But there is a voice within me that says that he is not the man for Laura Fairley. I pray to God, therefore, let him not marry her.
That was episode 1 of The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, dramatised for radio by Martin Wade. Marian was played by Juliet Aubrey, Walter by Toby Stevens, Laura by Emily Bruni, Mr. Fairley by Edward Petherbridge, and Sir Percival by Jeremy Clyde. Mr. Gilmore was Sean Baker, Anne Catherick, Alice Hart, Pesca, Ewan Meredith, Jacob, Oliver Cookson, and Mr. Dempster, Jonathan Keeble. The music was specially composed by Elizabeth Parker. The director was Cherry Cookson.